What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. Today it's the Game Week 11 preview. Now in this one, I don't think we actually have too many topics. I think it's 5 in total, and some of them are actually quite small. It probably won't take too long to get through. But there are some big talking points. So one of them is Manchester City, Pep Roulette. We're going to go through it again. There's some more rests in the Champions League. Some players played 90 minutes, so I'm sure a few owners weren't happy about Cancelo, Sterling, etc. So people wondering what to do with them. But those potential issues have been made even bigger by the fact that Aston Villa versus Newcastle has been postponed. We're going to talk about what might happen there, what transfers we should make, free hits and all that kind of stuff. So there's some big things to talk about which are probably going to take up quite a big chunk of this video. So as always, if you enjoy the Game Week previews, if you want to know what's happening to Pep Roulette, Aston Villa versus Newcastle, please do hit that like button. Hit subscribe if you're new around here now. I think we need about 2,500 people to hit that 125k mark. So we're quite close. Otherwise, let's get in and talk about a bit of Pep Guardiola. Okay, so the big talking point is probably Aston Villa versus Newcastle, like I mentioned at the start. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But for now, let's talk about Man City, because this is also quite a big thing, because they're on a really good fixture run. They've just beaten Burnley 5-0. I think we're expecting something similar, maybe not quite 5, but there should be some big returns against Fulham this week, West Brom in Game Week 13. So a lot of people are looking to bring in Man City players, or maybe already have, right? A lot of people transferred in Cancelo and Diaz last week. That's why they went up in price. De Bruyne is already in a lot of people's teams. Some people have been holding Sterling, Gabriel Jesus, potentially an option. But what is going on and who is going to play, I guess, is the big question. I will probably disclaimer this to say, trying to guess Pep Roulette is absolutely insane. We never get it right. And even the players that I think are going to start in the next game, you just never know. He could switch things up. But we have got a few clues to go on based on what's happened in the last few games and what's happened in the Champions League and how many minutes have been played and that kind of thing, right? So to me, right, and I sometimes think, I've talked about this quite a lot, but I sometimes think about decisions in how much money would I put on it? How much money would I put on this outcome happening, right? So example, in my team, I've got Son. Is there a chance over the next 2 weeks he could outscore or match Bruno Fernandes? I probably wouldn't put too much money on Bruno Fernandes just for the next 2 weeks, not saying for the rest of the season. When it comes to guessing who's going to play in that defence this week for Man City, the fact that Cancelo played in the Champions League 90 minutes at right back to basically cover Walker. Walker's going to come back in the league. Left back was Zinchenko, so Mendy didn't play. He's now had a bit of a rest, have to play in 2 games in a row. I would assume that Mendy comes back into that squad, i.e. Cancelo is not going to play because Walker will come in at right back, Mendy's going to come in at left back. Laporte didn't play, it was Garcia in the Champions League, so Laporte's going to come back in as long as there's no injuries during training and stuff like that. And so that leaves just one spot. Now, John Stones did quite well in the match where he came in against Burnley. Not that there was much to do in terms of defensive performances. But the fact that Diaz was taken off early in that game, yes, he played 90 in the Champions League, but it was a game against Porto. It was quite a tight match as well, at least by scoreline. I think I read the XG was something like over 3 for Man City, and they didn't score. So they created a lot of chances, even without watching the match. I know that's the case. But obviously when you don't score, you're worried about conceding the other end. And that's probably why Diaz played the full 90 minutes. But he did get taken off against Burnley. So to me, that's Pep trying to manage his minutes a bit. So I think Diaz keeps his place against Fulham. There is a chance, of course, that it's Mendy, Laporte, Stones and Walker. But Diaz I would be a little bit less worried about than I am about Cancelo. For me, Cancelo's not going to start the weekend. Now, what you should do about that is obviously up to you and depends on what your bench is looking like, right? Do you have a bench that can cover Cancelo if he doesn't play? There's always the chance he comes on, but with only 3 subs, it's probably less likely than it would be if there was 5. So do you have a player that can basically sub in for him? Because there is a chance he's still going to play. And if he doesn't play this week, will he play the next game? Although that is Man United. And then the West Brom game, will he play that? But would I transfer him straight back out if I've already bought him in? That would depend a lot on the bench. I do think maybe over the next 5 games he might get enough minutes to warrant his inclusion because he's probably going to get attacker returns and stuff like that. But I don't think, given how the last couple of games have gone, there's much merit in holding him long term. You could just keep him for another game or two and just kind of reaffirm the whole Mendy is back in now. Cancelo's going to cover minutes in the Champions League. But the fact they're top of their group as well, and that's now confirmed, a bit like Liverpool, it does mean he can rest players in the Champions League, so we're probably going to see Cancelo play again. So I'll be a little bit worried about him. I don't think he's necessarily must sell. You could give him the Fulham game and hope that he starts, but it's not looking likely. In attack, similar story, right? Mahrez has started the last 7 out of 8 in the league. I think he missed the first game, someone told me, but he tested positive for COVID, I think, or he was self-isolating. That's probably why he missed that one. But 7 of the last 8 he has started, and he wasn't in the squad for the Liverpool game. And he's been rested again last night. To me, that means he's probably going to start on that right-hand side. Jesus is almost certainly going to be up top because he got rested. He came on for a little bit. I think it was around the 72nd minute. So Jesus is going to play. So that's 2 of the front 3 already taken. De Bruyne got rested. He's definitely going to play against Fulham, you'd imagine. So that leaves that left spot. Now, one of the interesting things was the week before when Sterling got benched for Burnley, Torres got benched in the Champions League, but he didn't this week. They both started. But Torres came off early, 72nd minute, I think it was, for Jesus. So it's kind of muddied the water a bit because had they both played 90 minutes, I would just assume that Sterling comes back in. And let's be honest, Sterling doesn't miss many games, right? If you're talking about nailed onness, then De Bruyne is pretty much as nailed as you're going to get in a Pep Guardiola team. And then Raheem Sterling is kind of next down in line for that. So I think Sterling will probably play. And if I had him, I'd be loath to get rid of him. I think for me, and this is easy to say because I already own De Bruyne, I think the only way I would get rid of Sterling is if, one, I really wasn't sure if he was going to start, and I didn't have Kevin De Bruyne because he's going to be heavily captained. If you've got De Bruyne and Sterling, I'd be tempted to just captain De Bruyne and still play Sterling and hope that he plays. I know Torres came off, but we've heard Pep talk about the fact that Sterling can play week in, week out. He is very fit. He did say a few weeks ago he needed a rest, and he's had that now against Burnley. So perhaps that's the rest he needed to then play this match in the Champions League and then again against Fulham. So I wouldn't be as concerned about Sterling as I am about Cancelo, but the fact that Torres came off first did muddy the water a bit. So if I had to predict it, I think the front 3 will be Sterling, Jesus and Mahrez. So Mahrez now looks like a really good punt. Just scored a hat-trick against Burnley. Not necessarily expecting that again, but I think he's a decent option now for this week. It is Man United after that and then West Brom. So how long-term you want to keep Mahrez, I don't know. But he is an option to think about. So for me, the back line, I would say Mendy, Laporte, Diaz, Walker. And I think the front 3 will be Sterling, Jesus and Mahrez. De Bruyne are in as well. And I think Foden's going to get benched again. I really do think in the league, Foden is just done as an option now. It's too many times he's been benched. I know it's Fulham, but unless you've got a really, really good bench, I'd probably want rid of him too. Okay, so this is probably the big news this week, at least so far. Hopefully there's not bigger news because this has been quite frustrating for a lot of us. Aston Villa versus Newcastle has been postponed. There's been an outbreak of COVID at Newcastle. They've had to shut the training ground because so many of the first team are self-isolating. They're not going to be able to train. And I believe the earliest they can train is Friday, right? So that's when the game was scheduled to be. Side note, the FPL deadline is now Saturday instead. Because there's no Friday game, it's been moved back to the first game on Saturday, which means the FPL deadline is now 11 a.m. on the Saturday. So just to talk about a few things, right? Should you use your free hit? We'll come on to in a minute. Are you going to get an extra free hit or an extra transfer because this has happened? Almost certainly not. If FPL was going to do that, they would have already talked about it. End of the day, right, this is frustrating. And don't get me wrong, so many people are in a bad position now because double Villa or triple Villa like I'm on is a big thing because they've got great fixtures and every right to have that many players in the team given how good they have been. Look, we can get into whether Martinez is a good option because he hasn't got points recently. Ollie Watkins now off penalties, is he as good? That's kind of a separate conversation, but I'll touch on that a little bit. But ultimately I think we're all in a similar position. And this is no different to say the weather turning bad and the game getting postponed. I get the difference because weather happens every single year. Global pandemics don't. But you just got to put up with it. So there's no point moaning about it. Think about what you're going to do with your team and go from there. Should you use the free hit? I really would try and not use the free hit. I think when we get to the doubles and blank game weeks, and don't get me wrong, this is now a blank game week potentially for Aston Villa Newcastle. But when we get to the proper ones, when there's 3, 4, 5 teams missing, you're going to want your free hit then. So I would do everything you can not to use it. Just a quick couple of points on this, right? Could this game be moved to next week, midweek, Tuesday or Wednesday? Neither of these teams are in European competitions, so potentially it could. Now, if it got moved to Wednesday, FPL would almost certainly keep it in game week 11. So the match might get moved, but it would still be in game week 11. It would just be played later. It feels like if Newcastle have already been granted this stay of the game being cancelled or postponed, I don't think they're then going to want to start training on Friday for a match on Tuesday, Wednesday. It's possible, but I just don't see it happening. So it could be put further back. Now, that does mean that there's going to be a double game week for both of these teams. And Aston Villa already missed the first game of the season. So Aston Villa now have 2 double game weeks, potentially a triple game week. I doubt it again, because they don't have European competition. So it's much easier to slot their matches in, especially when one of them's against Newcastle, who also doesn't have European competition. So Newcastle are going to get a double game week. Aston Villa are going to get 2 now. So it's going to be interesting to see when that happens. So one argument is to keep the players, because in the future they're going to play 2 games in 1 game week. But obviously, even if you got rid of them, you can still bring them back. Everyone that's not got Aston Villa players now is not just going to ignore them for double game week. They're going to get them in anyway. So it's not necessarily a huge advantage to keep them unless the double game week is soon. But we don't know how soon it might be at this point. So the fact that there is midweek games around in the next couple of weeks means they're not obviously going to place it then. So it might be like game week 17 onwards until they maybe slot that game in. So it is a few weeks away. Now, I guess the important chat is what to do with the players. First of all, wait as long as possible before making your transfer. We've said that so much, in past seasons, but this year in particular, right? You've got to try and wait as long as possible. Do not make any transfers now until we hear the press conference. By Friday, or before the Saturday deadline, we might find out when the game is getting rearranged. If it's not this week, it's going to be unlikely we'll find out. But if it is this week, we'll probably find out sooner rather than later. So that's something to keep in mind. Because obviously if they're playing in Game Week 11 still, you keep all those players because they've got a really good fixture against Newcastle. Let's say, for argument's sake, it doesn't get rearranged for this week. The question is, what should you do, right? There's some people with triple Villa. Maybe they got Wilson as well. Maybe they got Jamal Lewis. Maybe they got Cancelo and Sterling that they're worried about too. And so it is a bit of an issue. I'm sure there's some people out there with triple Villa, a couple of Newcastle and Sterling Cancelo, and they're absolutely panicking. And maybe a free hit's viable, but I still would try not to use it. I think for most people, it's kind of double or triple Villa, maybe 3 or 4 players basically, right? So don't panic, first of all. Hopefully you've got a bench. If you don't, you're maybe going to have to make some moves. Out of all the players that people have mostly got, if I think about the highly owned players, Grealish is the one I'd really want to try and keep. You could make moves such as Grealish. Like if you wanted to move him, Grealish to Jota is probably not a bad move. You might play against Wolves, play against Fulham, happy days, and then you can look to get Grealish back in later on down the line. His fixtures after the Villa fixtures aren't necessarily that great. Wolves away, Burnley at home, then it's West Brom away. That's obviously the good one. But Grealish is so good, most people are going to want him in the team anyway. He's only missing 1 week, at least as it stands. Martinez hasn't got many points. The thing with transferring goalkeepers, it's quite a low impact move. Like, yes, okay, they can get penalty saves and they can go up to 8, 9, 10 points, but it's not very often that happens. More likely you're going to get 2 points, maybe 3 if they get a save point, or you're going to get 6, maybe 7 points if they get a save point. So the chance of getting a big score from a goalkeeper change is not huge. And so I'm potentially thinking of going with 10 men, to be completely honest, and just playing. Like I can play my bench, Basuma and Dallas, instead of Grealish and Watkins. And I think one of the reasons I might do that is because they're not... it is Newcastle, so it's a good fixture, but I'm hoping for most of my points to come from the likes of Son and Salah and Kevin De Bruyne as my captain. I've got Calvert-Lewin against Burnley. I've got a pretty good defence in Chilwell. Reguilon, I think, could do okay against Arsenal. So I've got other ways to get points. I think Grealish and Watkins missing out is not necessarily the end of the world. So you don't have to transfer them out if you've got a bench. But there's moves you can make, right? If you wanted to get rid of Ollie Watkins, you could go down to a Charlie Adam. One thing I'm considering is moving to 3-5-2, which I was already considering anyway. I'm just bringing it forward a little bit. So, for example, Watkins and Basuma, who's currently my bench option, to Brewster, although I would be a little bit worried about whether he's going to play because he didn't start the last match. And getting Mahrez, who I think is going to start against Fulham. So I'm basically switching to 3-5-2. But for this week, I would play 4-4-2 or 4-3-3 or 3-5-2, whatever it is. Or 3-4-3, sorry, I should say, and play Brewster. And then I've still got Grealish to come back in. And then if I want to keep Mahrez for Man United and West Brom, I can. Or I can switch him down to Diogo Jota later on. So there are moves to make. I think Grealish has gone up quite a bit in price, and maybe some of you got on him early at 7 million, so you're worried about that. But as a general rule, if you're not going to lose too much money, like no more than about 0.1, 0.2, then you could just get rid of him for Jota and then bring him back in. Because he is great, but he's not necessarily a priority to own for Wolves and Burnley, right? So you could just bring him back a bit later on. Maybe for Burnley and West Brom and just skip the Wolves game. We're going to talk about Wolves in a minute, funnily enough. But I wouldn't panic too much. If you're going to swap the goalkeeper, I'd probably go for someone like Meslier. I think Leeds have got really good fixtures coming up. Even when they can see lots of shots, he's getting lots of saves as well. And he's right up there in the scoring along with like Martinez and McCarthy as well. So he's probably where I would go. But a lot of people are in this situation. You have bench players for a reason. If these are players, essentially, I'll try and cut this long story short. If these are players that you're going to want back in for the next game week, I would probably avoid getting rid of them, right? Just use your bench, maybe make transfers elsewhere, or go for, basically bring one of your transfer plans forward, do it this week, and then use what would have been your future plan to get the Villa players back, right? So don't panic. It could get rearranged. It might not. Don't use your free hit, and then just go from there. Okay, so I've spoken about formations before, and I'm not going to speak about this every week, but I did get quite a few questions about what's the ideal formation. Obviously, I talked recently, at least, about maybe switching to 3-5-2. First of all, my kind of thoughts on this are very similar to the start of the season. There isn't an ideal formation, right? Most of the time, you are literally talking about one player difference, right? I've got a 3-4-3. Great, I've got Calvert-Lewin in there. Maybe I switch Calvert-Lewin to Diogo Jota. Right, now I've got a 3-5-2. Every other player is the same. It's just Jota versus Calvert-Lewin, right? It's Rafinha versus Watkins, etc., etc. It's just one player. You can switch to 4-3-3. Maybe go for a double up with Chelsea, a Man City defender and Robertson as well, and you're still looking good. All you've done is go from Chilwell, Reece James, Robertson. You've taken out your really cheap midfielder and you've put in Diaz instead, or whatever it might be, right? It's just one player. So don't worry too much, right? One thing I would say is once you start, I've kind of touched on this already, but once you start messing with formations, there's nothing wrong with it, by the way. Obviously, you know, if you want to move from 3-4-3 to 3-5-2, most of the time you're using 2 free transfers because you probably haven't got the cash in the bank. You know, you've got like a Basuma like me in midfield, you want to upgrade them to a Jota or whoever it might be. There's a bit of money involved, so it costs 2 transfers most of the time. Therefore, when you want to transfer back, it still costs 2 transfers. I would really give... You don't need to be looking at the formation, you need to be looking at the players, right? So take my team, for example. I've got Calvert-Lewin, Watkins and Bamford. Let's just ignore the Aston Villa postponement for a second, right? Had that match been going ahead, I'd be perfectly fine with those 3 midfielders. Would Jota be good? Yes, but my midfield would have been Fernandes, De Bruyne, Salah, Grealish. There's just no room for him. And Calvert-Lewin's playing Burnley. I'm just not going to worry about it too much. Would I like Jota? Yes, but you can't have everyone. But at some point, I might switch to 3-5-2. It doesn't mean I necessarily think that is now a much, much better formation. I just think that potentially with the fixtures that Liverpool have got, Jota is better than Calvert-Lewin. But there's lots of other strikers. Once Newcastle game's finished or once the postponement's done, we're moving into game week 12. Callum Wilson's fixtures are still really good. Antonio's now back from injury. As long as he's fit going forward, he could be really good as well. People are starting to look at Cavani. I'm still not quite sure about him, but let's wait and see. He's another option up front. Basically, there's a lot of options to choose from. So it's not so simple as saying 3-5-2 is now the best or 3-4-3 is now the best. It depends what players you want. And like in midfield, 3-5-2, yeah. Usually there's a time when a lot of people switch that during the season for whatever reason. 3-4-3 is where people usually start, and then slowly towards the end of the season you get to a 3-5-2. Maybe it's because you get a bit more money in your team, like squad value and stuff. But usually the midfielders are more expensive, right? So it's not so like I would love to have Fernandes and Son and De Bruyne and Salah and Grealish and Jota, etc. But the money is not there, and it's a lot cheaper kind of in the forward line to get good priced players. Like I said, Rafinha is an option, maybe Neto, but they got bad fixtures, etc. So the cheap forwards still have something to say in terms of our structures. So I really wouldn't panic too much. I might move from 3-4-3 to 3-5-2, but all I'm doing is changing Calvert-Lewin to Jota. Nothing else in my squad is playing on my mind about why I'm switching formations. So don't worry about it too much. If you've got a 3-4-3, stick with it. You use the one less transfer, and if you're happy with it, go with it. I just don't want to lose any of my other midfielders, and I still might want to put Jota in. That's the main reason, right? If Grealish was out for a long time, or if someone got injured, then I just put Jota in. I just stick to 3-4-3. It just so happens that right now, circumstances are maybe going to dictate me moving. So people worry about it too much. What's the best formation? Look at the players you want, and then work backwards from there for what formation fits best for it. Okay, so I want to talk about Wolves for a bit because they have kind of changed formation. I think some of the stuff that's happened there is quite interesting. Obviously, a lot of people messaged me about Kilman as well in particular. I'll just say again, I've kind of already mentioned this on a few videos. I know people have pointed out in the comments that I've kind of skipped over it. I haven't, but obviously I do a lot of videos, and I'm not going to keep mentioning every single one, but Raul Jimenez, it has come back now. We haven't really talked about it since. He's got a fractured skull, which is big, right? I think that's similar to what Petr Cech had. Now, I mean, what's going to happen, I don't know. Obviously, wishing him the best and hopefully has a speedy recovery. I think at points like this, FPL kind of goes out the window. You can be frustrated when a game gets called off. You can even be frustrated about a minor injury that someone picks up just before a game week because it's annoying for your team. But this is a player who knows when or if he'll even be back. Hopefully he will be. And you just forget about FPL. If you've got Jimenez, just get over it. Move him on to someone else and just be done with it. But yeah, I really hope he's back. I think it's not a great injury for anyone. I think the difference, obviously, for a goalkeeper is they're not heading the ball. For a forward, you are. So how quickly he can come back, I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to speculate. It's going to be a while till we see him back on a pitch. But I really hope we do, because I think in the last couple of years, it's been hugely refreshing seeing someone like that come in. Like basically, Wolves came up and they just... In terms of what we thought they might do, they kind of blew the league away. Like, they've been so good there with Nuno, and Jimenez has led the line. And there's a reason that Jimenez is on my shirt of Wolves at the start of the video, because he was an absolute legend that first season. I got him on him early, and he was the reason that my season turned around. So a lot of love for Raul Jimenez, and I hope he's back soon. But as always, we've got to kind of get on with things and talk about Wolves in general. Now, even with him in the side, they've moved to a back four. Now, this is really interesting. Usually a manager moving to back five or back four, whatever. But for Wolves, Nuno is literally, as far as I'm aware, he has literally played back five every single game since he took over that team, even in the Championship. And now he's playing a back four all of a sudden. Now, whether that continues going forward, obviously the Jimenez thing is going to shake things up a little bit. I would imagine they'll probably buy a striker in January, because their only real backup is Fabio Silva. He's quite young. They've not really used him too much. So it'll be interesting to see whether he just gets put straight in and plays week in, week out. But they did move to a back four. Now, the interesting thing, in the last two games where they've used it, they've had 24 shots in the box, which is the fourth highest of every team in the league. Now, they have played Southampton and Arsenal, so you can read into that what you want. But being the fourth highest is pretty decent. To give you some context, the first 8 game weeks, now they did have some tricky fixtures in there, but the first 8, so obviously the 8 before the last 2 they played, they were the 5th worst, right? Only Sheffield United, Newcastle, West Brom and Burnley had fewer, and they are pretty non-attacking teams. And we've said it quite a lot, right? I've been saying recently that if you've got a defender about to play Wolves, it's probably not that bad. They don't score too many goals. So it looks like it might happen. They did quite well against Arsenal, got a couple of goals, took a lot of shots over the last 2 game weeks. Obviously, that is the caveat, that's a small sample size. It's only 2 games, we don't know. And obviously, Jimenez missing is a massive blow to that team as well. So exactly what's going to happen, we don't know. But they have switched to a back four. Whether or not they'll switch to a back five for difficult games, i.e. Liverpool up next, we're going to have to wait and see. But Kilman is now a potential option. Now, if you've got him in your team, obviously he's very cheap. He's probably not damaged your overall team too much if he doesn't play, because hopefully you've got some other defenders that can play as well. And the fixtures coming up are pretty awful. So they play Liverpool, Chelsea, Spurs and Man United in the next 6. So I'm not sure how often people would have wanted to play Kilman anyway. But in this back four, he's not first choice. It's going to be Cody, Bolly, whoever they play left back, and obviously Semedo right back as well. So that makes, and there's a few things to discuss there. I guess it makes Semedo probably a worse option, not playing as a wing back. No one was looking at Marçal anyway. If he plays left back, or Aitner or whoever it is plays left back. And Bolly and Cody, Cody in particular, never really went forward anyway. So Size is not an option, we know that anyway. Kilman potentially not, but I would, unless you're really stuck for defence, you just keep him in your squad for the next couple of weeks and see if they go back to that back five or not. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. In terms of who plays up front, Fabio Silva or Neto play there, will they go back to 2 up front, play Traore and someone else as well? We're going to have to wait and see, but I did think it was interesting that they have moved to that back four after so long as playing as a 5. So what to do with Kilman? Just wait, unless you need to make a transfer, in which case there's loads of 4.5s. Leeds in particular, I think, look really good going forward. Not this week, unfortunately, but there to look at. Maybe not Aston Villa now, because that's been postponed. But you could go to West Ham defence still. I think they still look quite good defensively too. So there's lots of options you could go for. And I think we need to now monitor the likes of Neto, Podence and Traore and just see how they set up going forward. And obviously Fabio Silva is very cheap. But the good thing is the fixtures are bad. We can monitor how it goes and then maybe see after those fixtures turn a bit. But I just wanted to talk about it because a lot of people have got Kilman. And it's also interesting, their shots in the box seem to have increased quite a bit, but it is a small sample size. Let's see what happens in the next few weeks. Okay, so we're maybe getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here, but it's important to think about these things ahead of time so that you can plan rather than wait till it happens, i.e. fixture turn, and then be thinking, oh, well, I'm stuck with this player now. I should have thought ahead. And I did the same with Kane and Son, right? I was talking about getting rid of them a couple of weeks before I actually wanted to get rid of them. I still have Son, right? So things happen, things change in FPL where, the plans don't necessarily happen because bad things happen in FPL and we just have to live with it. But after game week 11, where they played Burnley away, which is an okay fixture, I wouldn't expect Everton to score a huge amount of goals there. They played Chelsea, Leicester, Arsenal, Sheffield United, Man City, West Ham, Wolves. That is a tricky run, right? And very much like Kane and Son, I mean, I would be a hypocrite not to talk about bad fixtures runs after I talk so much about Kane and Son. As with Kane and Son, do I think that Calvert-Lewin goes into that next, 6 or 7 games and doesn't score? Absolutely not. I'm sure he'll get a few goals along the way. He's been in such good form this year. He gets good chances. I don't see why he wouldn't continue to score. Is he going to score at the same rate he has been? Almost certainly not, right? The fixtures are difficult. And like I said, I don't want to be a hypocrite talking about Kane and Son and not talk about him. There are a few different things about this situation, though, of course. Kane and Son, Son's over 9 million. Kane's coming up to nearly 11 million. There's a big difference in price. Calvert-Lewin's only 7.9, and a lot of us jumped on earlier, 7, 7.1, 7.2. So he's not an expensive player. With Kane, the big reason I wanted to get rid of him was not because I thought he was going to stop scoring, although he hasn't done very well, because I wanted to get De Bruyne and have Salah as well for captaincy, right? And that's the big difference. With Calvert-Lewin, I'm not worried about captaincy. And one thing I've really tried to do this year is to not worry about those cheap players in my squad. Of course, you get on a defender that's 4.5, they get 4 clean sheets in a row. That's brilliant, great value. Cheap strikers, Bamford if you got on him early, Adams if you had him recently. They're really good points and they really do top up what sometimes is a bad score or what even makes a good score great. But they're not always where the key points are coming from. Like this week, for example, De Bruyne captain, I've got Salah in the team, I've got Son. I'm hoping to get big points from them. If Calvert-Lewin chips in, great. If Lamptey chips in, great. But that's not where I'm expecting the majority of my points, and why I wouldn't necessarily be in such a rush to get rid of Calvert-Lewin. But the fixtures are bad, and one of the things you could do is maybe go up in price to a different striker if you've got a bit of money in the bank, like Jesus or something like that, if Aguero continues to not be available. Or you can go down. If you haven't got Bamford, you've not got Watkins, Antonio, Wilson, etc. I'm not going to reel off all the names again, but there's a lot of them, and that gives you money to spend elsewhere. Maybe you want to switch to 3-5-2, which we've already talked about. Jota is cheaper than Calvert-Lewin. So not only would you switch maybe if you've got this kind of structure, 4.5 million mid to a 4.5 million forward, you'd also have a little bit of spare change if you wanted to upgrade your defence or whatever it might be. So I don't think there's an issue with selling him. I don't think there's an issue with keeping him either, because the captaincy is not really a problem and he's not taking up such a big chunk of budget like Son and Kane did, and as other players will when their fixtures turn as well. The only thing I would say is I think Everton are really going to miss Coleman and Luca Dean. A lot of the creativity goes through Rodriguez, and they do rely on him quite a bit. But also, especially if you saw those matches early on, Coleman and Luca Dean were bombing forward, even in a back four, and they were playing balls across the box. Luca Dean, I know it was in a back five, but he provided one of the assists against Fulham as well. And Coleman was really good. I was actually quite impressed with him. I think he had a really bad injury, didn't he, for Ireland a while back. And I wondered if he'd ever get back to kind of bombing up and down that line. He had been this year, but he's gone and got injured again. Unknown return date on FPL, so I'm not sure quite how long he's out for. But Luca Dean's a long-term one. So not ideal to not have both of those players out and these fixtures. Now, they did switch to a back five for a time against Fulham, and obviously Iwobi played quite well. But in the last match, he played left wing back. Tom Davis is a right wing back. It's not ideal, right? That's not creativity like Coleman and Luca Dean. So really then it all kind of relies on Rodriguez or Decore getting further forward. And I think overall it all spells to potentially a good time to jump off Calvert-Lewin if you've got a spare transfer or a good transfer to make, or if you need the money for elsewhere. Do I think he's a must-sell? A bit like Kane and Son? Absolutely not. Do I think his volume of points are about to go down? Absolutely. And I do think Coleman and Dean are very big misses. So that's it for this one. Thanks very much for watching. I know there was a lot of info in there. Hopefully you were able to take it in. Hopefully it was useful as well. I know Man City and Aston Villa Newcastle in particular were really big talking points this week, and I think Calvert-Lewin will be in the next couple of weeks. I think even if you didn't ask me a question about that this week, I think when you see the fixtures for the next few weeks, you almost certainly will be. And before the Aston Villa game got postponed, I was eyeing up a move to take him out. That might delay it, but at some point soon, he might be gone from my team. So we'll have to wait and see. I just think the games he's playing, then they're not necessarily teams that are going to concede a lot of goals. So Everton will probably struggle a little bit more. If you have enjoyed the video, please do give it a like. Much appreciated as always. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you want to support me and Let's Talk FPL even further, I almost got the name wrong there. Let's Talk FPL even further, then you can support me on patreon.com/Let's Talk FPL. There's a link to the description below. Let us build this channel even bigger and better than it already is, or at least I hope you think it is. So there's a link to that in the description below, and every week or every video I always shout out everyone signed up on the Patreon's Legends Wall, so thank you very much to everyone that already is signed up. And also Sashin S, John N and Amrit as well, who have all signed up since the last video. So much appreciated to you. Great time to sign up. Treat yourself to an early Christmas present and get on the Patreon. There's Q&As over there, Slack access, team reveals, all that kind of stuff. Once I know what the hell I'm doing with Aston Villa versus Newcastle, I'll put it up on Patreon first. And obviously I'll be discussing it in the deadline stream as well. Because the deadline has been moved, I'll do the captaincy video on Friday and just do a stream on Thursday and then a deadline stream on Saturday instead. So I won't bring everything forward a little bit, but there will be a Q&A over on Patreon on Friday as well if you want to check that out. So thank you very much for listening and watching today. I will catch you tomorrow for a live stream Q&A. Until then, good luck with figuring out what the hell to do with Aston Villa versus Newcastle.